They refused to put my name on my late husband's gravestone and said, "You were just a mistake he made." What the DNA results revealed destroyed their entire family. The DNA results were already in my purse when his sister stood up in that room and called me a mistake he made. She said it loud. She said it like it was the final word. It was the last thing she said with any confidence, because she hadn't seen the results yet. I had, and I knew what they meant for every single person in that room. 18 months before I sat across that conference table, I was a wife. I was happy. I thought the hardest thing I would ever face was learning to love a man whose family didn't love me back. I had no idea that was just the warm-up. My name is Vivian, and if you want to understand what those DNA results meant, and why they didn't just end a legal dispute but untraveled a lie that family had been living inside for over 30 years, then you need to understand what they took from me first. All of it, starting from the beginning. If you're new here, take a second and subscribe. We tell stories like this every single week. Stories about people who refuse to let the cruelest version of events be the final one. Now let's go back. Houston, Texas. 2.5 years before that conference room. Vivian Marsh, Vivian Cole now, was 34 years old and working as a certified occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center in the 3rd Ward. It was the kind of work that asked everything from you and somehow still gave back more. She helped people relearn how to button a shirt after a stroke, how to hold a fork after a car accident, how to trust their own hands again after their body had betrayed them. She was good at it because she genuinely believed people could recover from what broke them. She would need that belief later. She had no idea how much. She had married Roland Cole 14 months before any of this began. Not in a big church ceremony with a reception hall and a DJ and 300 people eating off a buffet. In a small civil ceremony at the courthouse downtown on a Wednesday afternoon in October, with 2 witnesses and a judge who mispronounced Vivian's last name and corrected himself twice. They had laughed about it the whole drive home. Roland had laughed so hard at a red light that he had to put the car in park. Roland was 41, a structural engineer, the kind of man who was careful with numbers and generous with everything else. He remembered details, not in a showy way, not to impress you, just because he actually listened when you talked. He had met Vivian at a mutual friend's cookout on a Saturday in June, had asked for her number before the food was even ready, and then had waited 4 full days before using it because he didn't want to seem eager. She had liked that about him the moment she found out. The patience of a man who understood that good things don't need to be rushed. They had bought a house together in Pearland, a 2-bedroom with a backyard that was mostly brown grass and good intentions. Roland had a daughter from a previous relationship, 9-year-old Amara, who came every other weekend and called Vivian by her first name in a way that was slowly, quietly becoming something warmer. Not daughter, not friend. Something in between that didn't have a word yet, but felt real. On their first anniversary, Roland came home with a small wrapped package. No occasion beyond the date. No elaborate setup. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and pushed it across to her, and watched her open it with the look of a man who already knew you were going to like it. Inside was a photograph, the one a friend had taken on her phone outside the courthouse on their wedding day. Vivian laughing at something Roland had just said. Roland looking at her with the specific expression of a man who cannot believe his luck. He had taken that phone photo and had it printed and properly framed. Clean, white matte, simple, dark frame. Professional, permanent. She turned it over. On the back, in his handwriting, Roland wrote in all caps, small and precise the way engineers do. It said, "I do the courthouse again, and again, and again." She put it on the nightstand. It stayed there every night of their marriage. The one shadow in the life. Roland's family. His mother, Claudette, and his sister, Desiree. Both in the Third Ward. Both planted deep in Greater Hope Baptist Church, where Roland had grown up and been baptized, and sung in the youth choir at 14. They had not come to the wedding. Claudette said she hadn't been given enough notice. Desiree said she had a prior commitment. Roland said they'd come around eventually, the way he said most hard things, quietly, with the particular optimism of a man who has loved difficult people his whole life and decided to keep loving them anyway. Vivian said she hoped he was right. Neither of them said what they actually thought. The first thing Claudette ever said directly to Vivian was a compliment. She said Vivian had good skin. She said it at the first dinner Vivian attended, a Sunday afternoon situation at Claudette's house in the Third Ward, a house that smelled like pine sol and frying onions, and decades of people who knew exactly where they stood. Claudette served everyone individually. She went around the table, Roland first, then Desiree, then Desiree's friend who had apparently just stopped by, then the children, then Vivian. Last. Without comment, without acknowledgement, just the plate set down in front of her like an afterthought, like something added to the list at the final moment. Vivian looked at Roland. Roland was talking to his cousin and had not seen it. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself some people just move around their kitchen in a particular order and it doesn't mean anything. And she was looking for problems that weren't there. She was good at being reasonable. It was one of the things that made her easy to underestimate. Desiree was 38, unmarried, sharp in the way of someone who has decided that sharpness is the same as strength. She was a project manager at a logistics company, efficient and well-dressed, and entirely comfortable being the most important woman in any room her family occupied. She had been that woman her whole life. Roland's marriage had introduced a complication she had not budgeted for. She handled it the way competent people handle problems, systematically. She began referring to Vivian in family group texts as Roland's wife, never Vivian, never by name, just a title, like a placeholder. When Vivian responded directly in the thread, her messages received reactions. A thumbs up, occasionally a heart, but never a direct reply. Just enough acknowledgement to avoid accusation, not enough to constitute actual inclusion. At Greater Hope Baptist, where Roland still attended out of habit and love for the music and the particular feeling of being in a room where people had known him since he was a boy, Pastor Mosley delivered a sermon in September about being unequally yoked. It was not subtle. It was the kind of sermon that has a specific target and wants the target to feel it without being able to name it, the kind of quiet cruelty that gets dressed up in Scripture. Vivian sat in the pew in her good dress and felt the weight of 60 people who had made a decision about her before she ever opened her mouth. Several of them turned to look at her during the relevant passage, not all at once, one and then another, like a slow wave moving through the pews. She kept her eyes on the pastor. She kept her face neutral. She had learned, in years of working with patients, relearning how to move through the world after something had broken in them, that the body communicates everything you're trying to hide. She held hers still. Roland squeezed her hand. He did not say anything publicly. This was his church, his people, the place where his mother had raised him, and his childhood self was still preserved in the congregation's memory. She understood why he stayed quiet. She didn't like it. Those were two different things she kept in two different places inside herself. Roland's best friend since college was a man named Kwame. Big laugh, easy in his own skin, the kind of person who fills a room without appearing to try. Vivian had liked him immediately. He had been warm with her in the early months, genuinely warm, the kind that doesn't need an occasion. But somewhere around month 3 of the marriage, it changed. Not disappeared, cooled. Became more deliberate, like a man choosing his words before they left his mouth. She noticed it the way you notice a temperature change before you can name it. A feeling first, then an observation, then a question filed away for later because you don't yet have enough to ask it directly. She filed it and kept moving. She discovered one afternoon, going through their shared filing cabinet while looking for the car insurance renewal, that Roland's life insurance policy still listed Claudette as the primary beneficiary. Roland had taken it out 3 years before they met. She brought it to him that evening, kept her voice level, asked when he planned to update it. He said he'd been meaning to. He said he kept forgetting. She said she needed him to not keep forgetting. He updated it eventually, after 4 separate conversations across 2 months. 4 conversations for a thing that should have required one. She noted this without putting too much into it. A man drowning in work and family obligation, forgetting administrative tasks. It happened. She believed that explanation because at that point she still had no reason not to. Desiree told someone at church that Roland had married in a hurry and that the family was waiting to see how it goes. This got back to Vivian through a woman named Phyllis, who had the specific nervous energy of a person delivering information they feel guilty about having. Phyllis said she thought Vivian should know. Vivian thanked her. She went home, and she sat with it, waiting to see how it goes, like a weather pattern, like something temporary that hadn't been approved yet. Then one evening, Kwame called Roland while Vivian was in the kitchen making dinner. She could see Roland through the glass door to the back patio. He stepped outside to take it, which he sometimes did. She didn't think much of it at first. But then she watched his posture change, the way his shoulders came up, the way he turned slightly away from the glass, not all the way, just enough. When he came back inside, his face was resettled into normal, but not quite right, the way a room looks when someone has straightened it quickly before you arrived. She asked who it was. He said, Kwame, fantasy football. She said, okay. She didn't push it. She had learned, in her work, that people tell you things when they're ready, and pushing before they're ready just teaches them to hide better. She filed it. She kept moving. Roland's headaches started in November. He mentioned them once, dismissed them twice, and stopped mentioning them after that. Vivian noticed him squinting at screens, noticed him reaching for Tylenol in the mornings. She was an occupational therapist. She knew how to read a body the way other people read faces. She asked him to go to the doctor. He said he had an appointment. He said the results were fine. She looked at his face when he said it and believed it, and also felt, quietly, that she was not being told everything. She told herself, he is a grown man. He will tell you when he is ready. She was right about the first part. Roland was diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumor in March, glioblastoma, stage 4. The oncologist was a small, precise woman who delivered the information the way doctors learn to deliver the worst news, clearly without softening it, because softening it only makes people think there is more room for hope than there is. Roland held Vivian's hand through the entire appointment and did not let go. He lived 7 more months. In those 7 months, he tried to do everything. He worked as long as he could. He saw Amara every weekend instead of every other one. He had long phone calls with people he cared about, and shorter ones with people he felt obligated to. He met with an estate attorney, a man named Wendell Okafor, out of Greenway Plaza, and he told Vivian, during a quiet evening in June when the light was going gold through their back window, that he had taken care of things. The house, the accounts, a small investment portfolio he had built over 15 years of careful, unfussy saving. He said, "You won't have to worry, Viv. I took care of it." She said she knew he had. She said she didn't want to talk about it. He said they had to talk about it. Said, "Not tonight." He said, "Okay, not tonight." He died on a Tuesday morning in October, at home, in their bedroom, with Vivian beside him and the photograph on the nightstand, and the light coming through the curtains in the same gold way it always did in the mornings. The family arrived that afternoon. What happened in the next 72 hours was not grief. It looked like grief from a distance, the gathering, the arrangements, the logistics of death. But up close, it was something else. It was organized. It moved too fast and in too consistent a direction to be anything other than planned. Claudette took over the funeral arrangements without asking Vivian. She called the funeral home directly, the one the family had used for 30 years, where they knew everyone by name, and made every decision. Casket, flowers, the order of service, the music. Desiree handled the program. Vivian found out about the obituary when a church member texted to say she was sorry for Vivian's loss and how lovely the memorial program looked. Vivian was listed as a close friend, not wife, not partner, not even her last name. A close friend between two of Roland's college acquaintances and a former co-worker. She called the funeral home. They told her the family had primary authority over the arrangements and that the programs had already been printed. She went to the service. She sat in a pew toward the front and watched people she had cooked for, eaten with, sat next to in church, watch her like she was a guest. Like she was someone who had known Roland professionally, maybe. Like the 14 months of their marriage were a rumor someone hadn't fully confirmed. After the burial, she asked about the gravestone. She asked Desiree directly, which she should not have done. Should have gone through the funeral home, should have gone through a lawyer, should have understood that every direct request was just an opportunity for Desiree to say the quiet part out loud. Desiree looked at her with an expression that had been prepared in advance. She said, "We're handling the gravestone as a family." She said, "Your name won't be on it." And when Vivian asked why, keeping her voice level, her hands still, everything she had still intact, Desiree said, "Because you were just a mistake he made, and we're not putting a mistake on his permanent record." Vivian went home. She sat on the edge of the bed in the room where Roland had died 3 weeks before. She looked at the photograph on the nightstand. She turned it over and read his handwriting for the 10,000th time. "I'd do the courthouse again, and again, and again." She put the photograph in her bag. She did not leave it on the nightstand anymore. She was going to need it with her. 3 weeks after the funeral, she went to see Wendell Okafor. He was a careful man, the kind of attorney who paused before speaking, like he wanted to be sure of every word. He told her something that made the room tilt slightly on its axis. Roland had updated his will, had updated his accounts, had done everything he said he'd done. But in the final 2 weeks of his life, when Vivian had been working double shifts at the rehabilitation center to cover what the medical insurance didn't, when Roland was on medications that dimmed him, when the house had become a place where people came and went with casseroles and condolences and access. Someone had brought him an amendment to the estate documents. The amendment redirected the house and the investment portfolio into the family trust. The trust controlled by Claudette. Wendell showed her the signature page. Vivian looked at Roland's name. She had read his handwriting every day for 14 months. She had read it again this morning, turned the photograph over in her hands before she left the house. She knew his handwriting the way you know the sound of someone's voice, not because you studied it, but because it was just always there. That was not Roland's handwriting. "Who witnessed it?" she asked. Wendell pointed to the witness line. "Kwame." She sat with that for a moment, the warmth that had cooled, the phone call on the patio, the posture change, the fantasy football explanation he'd given while looking just slightly to the left of her eyes. "Thank you," she said to Wendell. She took a photo of every page with her phone. She thanked him again, and she left. She called Kwame from the parking garage, 3 floors down, gray concrete, her voice echoing slightly. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She did not leave a message. She sat in her car. She thought about what Roland had said to her in July, one of the last weeks when he was still fully himself, still present, still recognizably Roland, before the medication started making him someone slightly adjacent to the man she married. He had taken her hand at the kitchen table and said, "Viv, listen. There's something about my family I need you to understand." And then he had stopped, like he was choosing between 2 paths and couldn't decide. And then Amara had called from the other room, and the moment had ended, and he had never come back to it. She had assumed it was about Claudette and Desiree, about how to handle them after he was gone. But sitting in that parking garage, looking at the photo of a forged signature on her phone, she thought, what if it was something else? What if it was something he knew but couldn't say? What if he was pointing her somewhere specific and ran out of time before he could name the direction? She didn't know what test to order. She ordered the only one that made sense. She swabbed her cheek, mailed the kit, and waited. She told no one. Everything came apart in the weeks that followed. The house went to the family trust within 30 days of Wendell's discovery. Vivian had 30 days to vacate. She packed her clothes, her work things, her books, her coffee maker, and the photograph. She left the furniture. She left the brown grass backyard. She left the kitchen where she had made dinner while watching Roland's posture change on the other side of the glass door. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Missouri City, 40 minutes from the rehabilitation center, which meant getting up an hour earlier every morning and watching her gas budget the way you watch something that is almost gone. The apartment was clean and small and entirely without character, which suited her in the specific way that blank spaces suit people who are not yet ready to decide what they are. She was not trying to build a life right now. She was trying to get through the week, then the next one. She told herself that was enough for now. On the good days, she believed it. Claudette contested the life insurance beneficiary update, claiming Vivian had pressured Roland into changing it during his illness. The insurance company froze the payout pending investigation. Vivian had no estate income, no house, and a legal fight in front of her that she had not budgeted for in any version of her life. At Greater Hope Baptist, Pastor Mosley prayed for the family by name, Claudette, Desiree, young Amara, and said the church would be a support to them through their grief. Vivian's name was not in the prayer. She was not asked to speak at the memorial service the church held 3 weeks after the funeral. She found out about the service when Phyllis texted her, not to invite her, but to say she'd seen the flyer and wanted Vivian to know she was thinking of her. Phyllis also said, "I'm sorry, I can't be in the middle of this." After that text, the thread went quiet. One Sunday, 6 weeks after Roland died, 8 weeks after the gravestone went up without her name, Vivian drove to the cemetery alone. She brought nothing. She just went. She found Roland's section, walked to the stone, and stood in front of it. Roland James Cole, beloved son and brother. Not husband, not father, son and brother. Like the 14 months of their marriage had been a footnote someone had decided to omit. Like she had not been beside him every day of his dying. Like she had not been the person who held his hand through the worst appointment of his life, who rearranged her entire career to cover what the insurance didn't. Who was there on the Tuesday morning when he exhaled for the last time, and the room went different and quiet in a way no room had ever been before. She stood there for a long time. It started to rain. She did not move. She let it rain on her. She let herself feel the full weight of what that stone said and what it didn't say. Let herself be angry and sad and wronged all the way down to the bottom of it, because she had learned, in her work, that the people who skip the bottom of their grief are the ones who carry it forever. You have to go down before you can come back up. Then she reached into her bag and took out the photograph. She stood in the rain at her husband's grave and looked at his face and turned the frame over and read the back. "I'd do the courthouse again, and again, and again." She put it back in her bag. She walked back to her car. She drove home. She looked up forensic document examiners. She called a civil rights attorney named Adaise Osei, who specialized in estate fraud and had a website that was no-nonsense and direct and felt like the legal equivalent of a person who does not lose. She also, quietly, checked the status of her DNA kit. Still processing. She did not know yet what it would show, but Roland had pointed her somewhere. She was going to go there. 12 months passed. Vivian moved through them the way she moved through hard things, one day, then the next, without announcement. Adaise Osei filed the estate fraud complaint. The forensic document examiner, a woman out of Dallas who had testified in 43 cases and had the calm certainty of someone who has been right so many times she no longer needs to perform it, delivered her analysis. The signature on the amendment was not Roland's. The letter formation, the pressure patterns, the specific way Roland drew his capital R and capital C, none of it matched. The amendment was a forgery, definitively. The estate challenge opened formally. The family's attorney responded. The machinery of it ground forward slowly, the way legal machinery always does, indifferent to the human beings it's sorting. Vivian was promoted to clinical coordinator at the rehabilitation center. The raise was modest. She took it and said, "Thank you," and got back to work. She started seeing private clients on Saturday mornings, 2 hours in a community center meeting room, people who needed occupational therapy but couldn't afford the full clinical rate. She charged them a sliding scale. She built a small reputation. She started visiting Amara independently. Roland's daughter's mother, a woman named Keisha, had no quarrel with Vivian, and never had. Keisha was practical and direct, and said once, over coffee at her kitchen table, "You were good to my daughter, and you were good to Roland, and I don't care what his mama says." Amara was 11 now. She asked about her father sometimes. Vivian told her true things, not all of them. The true ones that were meant for an 11-year-old. The DNA results arrived on a Thursday. Plain envelope. Her name in the address window. She was home alone, sitting at the kitchen table in her Missouri City apartment, still in her work clothes. She opened the envelope. She read the results, read them again, sat with them for a long time. Then she put them in her purse. She did not call Adaze immediately. She did not call anyone. She sat at the table in the quiet apartment and thought about Roland at the kitchen table in their house in Pearland, reaching across to push the wrapped photograph toward her, watching her face while she opened it. Thought about him on the patio with his shoulders up and his face turned slightly away from the glass. Thought about him at the kitchen table in July, saying, "There's something about my family I need you to understand," and then stopping. He had known something, not exactly this, but something. Enough. She put on the kettle. She made tea. She sat with what she now knew. 18 months after Roland died, the estate case had run its course through the evidence. The forged amendment ruled invalid. The house returned to Vivian as Roland's legal spouse. The investment portfolio, $183,000, built over 15 years of Roland putting away a little every month, with the consistency of a man who believed in the future, even when the future was abstract, restored to her. The life insurance payout, released. She did not move back into the house in Pearland. She thought about it. She decided against it. Some spaces hold too much, and you love them better from a distance. She sold the house. She used the proceeds and the insurance payout to open a small occupational therapy practice in the 3rd Ward. Roland's neighborhood. The neighborhood where Greater Hope Baptist stood, where Claudette still lived, where Roland had grown up and been known and loved by a community that had decided Vivian wasn't worth knowing. She named the practice Cole Rehabilitation, after him. She picked that neighborhood on purpose. She wanted his name on a sign on that street. She wanted people who had erased her from his obituary to drive past it every day. She was not doing it out of bitterness. She was doing it out of love, and the distinction mattered to her. The estate hearing was scheduled. Adaze called to tell her. Vivian asked who would be present. Adaze listed them: Claudette, Desiree, their attorney. Kwame had been subpoenaed as a witness. Vivian took the photograph out of her bag that evening. She had carried it every day for over a year, in her bag instead of on her nightstand, close instead of displayed, a thing to carry rather than a thing to look at from a distance. She held it and looked at Roland's face and thought about what was coming, and felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely ready. She put it back. She put the DNA envelope beside it. The conference room was on the 8th floor of a building downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the Houston skyline and the particular impersonal cleanliness of a space that exists only for conflict to be resolved in. Long table, leather chairs, a judge presiding over the formal proceeding, a court reporter in the corner, the low sound of the building's ventilation doing its work. Vivian arrived before the family. She chose her seat, not at the far end, not in a corner, but solidly in the middle of her side of the table, directly across from where she expected the family to sit. She set her bag down. She did not take out her phone. She folded her hands on the table and she waited. Claudette and Desiree arrived together. Claudette in all black, composed, moving with the slow authority of a woman who has never in her life considered that a room might not defer to her. Desiree slightly behind, well-dressed, carrying a legal pad like a person who has prepared talking points. They saw Vivian. Claudette looked through her, not past her, through her, the way you look through glass. Desiree gave her a single, evaluating glance, the kind designed to assess damage and find none, and then looked away. Kwame came last. He sat on the family's side of the table without looking up. He had aged in 18 months in the way that guilt ages people. Not dramatically, just steadily, a weight that settles in around the eyes. The judge's preliminary ruling was read into the record. The DNA evidence had survived the family's motion to exclude conditionally. Relevance would need to be established in the room, in real time. The family's attorney nodded, confident. He had filed that motion believing the condition would protect them. He had filed it not knowing what the results actually showed. Then the family's attorney gave Desiree the floor. She stood. She straightened her jacket. She was composed, clear, and completely certain of herself. The posture of a woman who has rehearsed this and knows how it ends. She said Vivian had no legitimate claim to Roland's name or his estate. She said the marriage had been brief and transactional. She said Vivian had taken advantage of a dying man's diminished capacity to insert herself into affairs that were not hers. She said the family was simply correcting an error. She said Vivian was a mistake Roland made. She sat down, smooth, final, satisfied. The room was quiet. Vivian looked at the table in front of her. She did not look at Desiree. She did not look at Claudette. She breathed in once, slowly, and then she gave Adèle the smallest nod. Adèle Osei stood up the way certain people stand, without performance, without announcement, with simply the presence of someone who does not need the room to pay attention, because the room is going to pay attention, regardless. She thanked Desiree for her statement. She said she'd like to address the question of legitimacy directly. She entered the marriage certificate into evidence. Legally married, 14 months. Not a mistake. A legal, witnessed, publicly recorded fact. She entered Roland's original will, the one Wendell Okafor had drafted before the forgery, into evidence. Vivian as primary beneficiary across all accounts. His handwriting on the signature line. His real handwriting. The family's attorney looked at it and said nothing. She entered the forensic document examiner's report. The amendment was a forgery. Every technical detail laid out in 41 pages of analysis. The family's attorney objected. The judge overruled him in 2 words. Then Adèle called Kwame to the stand. He sat in the witness chair like a man who has been carrying something for too long and has finally arrived at the place where he has to put it down. Adèle asked him what he had witnessed the night the amendment was signed. He was quiet for a moment, long enough that the room felt it. Then he said, "I witnessed the signature." He stopped. "But Roland didn't sign it. I was right there, and Roland didn't sign it." Another pause. Desiree had it prepared. She told me it was what Roland would have wanted, that he'd asked her to handle it because he wasn't always clear at that point. He looked at his hands. I believed her. I should not have believed her. Claudette made a sound that was not quite a word. Desiree said his name, low and sharp, a warning wrapped in 2 syllables. The judge said, "Order." Adèle said, "Your Honor, I'd now like to establish the relevance of the DNA evidence and request that it be entered into the record." The family's attorney rose. The judge held up a hand without looking at him and told Adèle to proceed with the foundation. Adèle looked at Vivian. Vivian reached into her bag. She took out the photograph first. She set it on the table in front of her, face up. Roland's face. Her own face, laughing at something he'd just said, outside a courthouse on a Wednesday in October. And on the back, visible to anyone at that table who leaned forward far enough to read it, his handwriting. Small, precise, all caps. "I'd do the courthouse again, and again, and again." She did not explain it. She did not hold it up. She set it on the table and let it sit there. Then she took out the DNA results envelope and passed it to Adaiz. Adaiz explained to the court. In the final weeks of Roland's life, during a moment of clarity between medication doses, he had taken Vivian's hand and told her there was something about his family she needed to understand. He hadn't been able to finish. He had said, "Get a test, Vivian. Just get a test. You'll understand when you see it." She had not known what he meant. After discovering the forged amendment, after finding Kwame's name on the witness line, after understanding that this family had organized itself against her with careful intention, she had ordered the only test that seemed to reach toward what Roland might have meant: a genealogical DNA panel, Roland's sample from his medical records, family samples already in the system from the fraud investigation. Adaize read the results into the record. Roland James Cole and Desiree Cole did not share the same biological father. The room went very still. Adaize continued. Desiree was Claudette's biological daughter. That was not in question. But Claudette's late husband, the man whose name was on the family trust, whose bloodline the trust had been specifically structured around, whose estate attorney had written an explicit clause 30 years ago restricting primary inheritance rights to biological heirs of his line, was not Desiree's biological father. The trust clause had existed for 3 decades, dormant, irrelevant until now. Written by a careful attorney at the instruction of a man who had apparently known or suspected and said what he needed to say in legal language, and then never brought it up again. Desiree's standing in the family trust was void. The assets she had used to absorb Roland's estate, the house, the portfolio, the claim of family authority, had been transferred using a standing she did not legally possess. The room did not erupt. Rooms don't erupt when the truth is that large. They go quiet, the way the air goes quiet before weather. Claudette's face moved through something that could not be named as any single emotion. It was the face of a woman watching a secret she has carried for 30 years become a public document. Desiree looked at her mother. Claudette did not look back. That was the moment, not the legal ruling, not the financial implications, not the court reporter typing it all down. That was the moment. The mother who would not meet her daughter's eyes. The thing that had lived between them, unspoken, for 3 decades, now read into a record in a conference room on the 8th floor of a building in downtown Houston. Vivian did not look at either of them. She was looking at the photograph on the table, Roland's face, his handwriting. She thought, "You knew something was under there. You didn't know exactly what, but you knew enough to point me toward it. And you trusted me to go find it. I found it, baby. I found it." The judge called a recess. She spoke to us one final time, not in that room. Afterward, after the recess and the rulings and the attorneys and the paperwork that would follow for months. After all of it had finished being official and become simply true. She said she didn't want to talk about the estate, what was restored to her, what was ruled invalid, what the trust clause meant going forward. She said that was between her and her attorney, and she was at peace with it. What she wanted to talk about was Roland, what he had known, or half known, or felt in the way that people feel things they can't fully see. She said she believed he hadn't known exactly what the DNA test would show, but she believed he knew his family. He had spent 41 years knowing them, loving them, forgiving them, navigating their particular architecture of silence and performance, and things that got passed down without being named. He knew there was something underneath. He knew the truth, whatever it was, would be her protection in a way he couldn't be once he was gone. So with what time and clarity he had left, he pointed her toward it. She said she thought about that a lot, about what it means to love someone enough to trust them with the thing you can't finish saying. She talked about the gravestone. She said she had gone back to the cemetery 3 weeks after the hearing. The stone still said, "son and brother." She said she stood there and she did not feel what she had expected to feel. She said she felt something quieter than vindication, something closer to completion. She said Roland knew who she was. Amara knew who she was. Keisha knew. Phyllis, even, still sending the occasional text, tentative, rebuilding something that had been interrupted. The people who mattered had always known. "A stone is just stone," she said. "The record is something else." She said this: "They can take your name off a stone. They cannot take your name out of the record, and the record always outlasts the lie." She said she named the practice after Roland because she wanted to do the work she believed in the neighborhood he came from, carrying his name forward the way he would have wanted it carried, in service, not in granite. She said she still carried the photograph in her bag. If this story stayed with you, if you recognized something in it, leave a comment and tell us what hit you hardest. And if you're new here, subscribe. We are here every week. And one last question, because it's the one I keep coming back to. Roland told Vivian to get a test without explaining why. He pointed her somewhere he couldn't follow. What do you think he knew? And what would you have done if you were in her place, sitting across that table with the results in your purse, waiting for someone to say the wrong thing one last time?